Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Facebook Live with the Global Institute for Tomorrow's CEO and founder, Chandran Nair.
Thank you.
So for those that have not tuned in before, today we will be having a session with Chandran to talk about some of the issues that are top of his mind. For this session in particular, it is our session is called Keeping the Moral Compass, and the session is about ethics, really. And prior to kind of coming online, we were talking about the pervasiveness of ethical failures and the danger that these failures have become so commonplace that we don't think that they're failures anymore and that people take it for granted and are no longer outraged by these failures. So perhaps you could elaborate a little bit more.
No, thank you. And thank you for all those who've tuned in. I thought it was important to just spend a bit of time on a podcast talking about this. Clearly, everyone talks about ethics, and it's a topic that's in the minds of many people. But at the same time, I get the sense that it's increasingly not on the minds for the reason that you pointed out. It's become so commonplace. There's so many dimensions of ethical failure that we've just taken it as the way the world is. And we're no more outraged. And I just wanted to bring a couple of examples that are close to, our personal, and then of course also examples and talk about some of the things that are happening in the world that are also hugely unethical, from intellectual dishonesty to financial dishonesty, right through to essentially people harassing others, which are all different elements of ethical failure. So that's really why I thought we'd spend a few minutes, rather than remain silent about these issues, but really talk about them and try and highlight the sort of spectrum of ethical failures that we are confronted with daily, but about which we remain so silent because we've almost normalized it.
So by ethics and these ethical failures, are you talking specifically about business ethics, or is kind of what you're thinking much broader than that?
I think, all of these ethical failures stem from individual ethical failures, whether it's in the business context, whether it's in the family context, whether it's a societal or community context, or whether it's the failing of business leaders. But fundamentally, there are individual actions that lead to ethical failures. But of course, the way people behave is also shaped by the cultures they're brought up in, the environment in which they're brought up in, and the acceptance. And I think it's important for us to call out, as I'm trying to do here, and I'm sure others are trying to do, that there is a normalization that is taking place where people see ethical failures as a massive corruption scandal, like if we're in Malaysia today, it's one MDB, whether it's the failing of a large multinational, etc. But those failings are essentially individual actions of small groups. So why do they become so persistent? And why have we begun to accept them? And I think that's really important to understand. So from my point of view, I just wanted to raise a couple of points. We become so accustomed to it because everyone stays silent and it becomes the norm. So it's normal. The other dimension of ethical failures I wanted to mention, just an example I have, is a friend of mine who essentially, someone who's on many levels almost a perfect citizen, but at the same time had a weakness with regard to a particular habit of his. I'm not going to go into the details, and then committed what he thought was an innocent crime, or not, he didn't think it was an innocent crime, he thought it was an innocent action that would enable him to essentially secure the stability of his family, etc., and an ambition he had. He ended up going to prison, and then he came out. And so these kind of failings are not necessarily, they're criminal in the eyes of the law, but they're not essentially criminal actions in terms of being criminalized people. So here's someone I thought I know well, who's a very good person, would do anything for me, yet, just crossed that line and rightfully, as it should be the case, paid the price for that. The question is, can he now overcome that habit he has, which essentially got him to? So that's a very fine line. And then there are others where, again, it's personal to me. I have a house in Malaysia in a community where it's essentially a development close to the rainforest. There are lots of things that one has to do properly if one is to protect that area. There are lots of rules in Malaysia about these things. You can't extract river water, you can't essentially turn agricultural land into residential, into hotels and businesses, etc. But more than 3/4 of the people who have bought premises there have absolutely broken every law for years. Of me and a few others have tried to complain to the authorities. They turned a blind eye, mainly because they've also been paid up by the people who are running businesses. But what's most interesting to me is that these people are breaking the law on the poor village people, the kampong people in that area. These are rich outsiders coming from Kuala Lumpur, etc., and dare I say, from other foreign countries, living in Malaysia, who would never even think of breaking the law in their home country and blatantly break the laws here. And they're not broken the laws without everyone knowing. Me and others have written numerous amounts of emails and complained, and they know they're breaking the law. But they seem so emboldened by the fact that they believe the law in this country doesn't matter. It is a tradable commodity. You can trade it, you can buy it out, enforcement is tradable, and they continue to do this. And I would say these are educated people, lawyers, doctors, engineers, all of these people. So how do they do that? They don't actually think they're breaking the law because in their minds, it is a viable way of doing business in a country in which they feel these things are essentially one way to essentially be commercially viable. So those are two different things that I'm very interested in seeing. That there is a complicity, and when you have this sort of complicity, you have a complete corrosion in a society because the most educated and even well-off people will break every law for small commercial gains. We're not talking about billion-dollar businesses here either. And it's interesting to see in the last month that the government, under the new government, have started to take action. We will see if, again, their desire to take action is bought out because it's tradable. So those are the things I kind of wanted to mention.
So quickly, hi Anas M and Chris, who just recently joined us. One thing I forgot to mention at the beginning, hold that thought, Chandran, sorry, was that if you have any questions for us, for Chandran in particular, please kind of type them in and we will kind of respond to you towards the end of this chat. So back to what you were saying about things like law being a tradable commodity. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? And then also then, if something like even law is a tradable commodity, how do we police this then? How do we make sure that individuals act morally or with morality and according to basic ethics?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to get people who listen to this think that I'm only referring to Malaysia. It's a widespread phenomenon. But fundamentally, it comes from the society norms that are established. So when I mentioned the foreigners in this country breaking the law, together with all the Malaysians, the same foreigners, say from Singapore, would not even dream of doing this in Singapore, because in Singapore, they essentially know there's a different culture, but the law is not tradable. The law is enforced to the hilt, right? So you have a rule of law, which then creates a different culture. I spent a lot of time in Hong Kong. I mean, in Hong Kong, there's a frenzy of media frenzy. Anyone senior in government has called to even have a small extension to their home, which breaks some bylaw within the urban planning guidelines. And that is how obsessed Hong Kong is, because you can't trade that.
Yeah.
So you have to have rules of law, and then which essentially start to determine the culture. But in Japan, it's very different. In Japan, it's not about the rule of law, it's the rule of culture. No Japanese person would even dream of trying to break the law. But even more interestingly, they would not create an extension to their house if they even thought that it would create a bit of a stir in the village or in their community, because their whole perception is that there's a collective wellness and well-being, and the individual, first thing, must never break the law, but even within the law, there are constraints within the individual can act so that it doesn't impinge on the rights of others. I mean, that's an extreme, but that's only Japan, maybe Korea too, right? So you have to have societies that start to instill these values. And when those values are not built in, then it's very difficult to create that sort of culture of conformity towards law. I would argue that Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore understood very early on that to create that culture, you have to impose very tough rules, which Lee Kuan Yew did, and some would argue it was draconian about cigarette smoking, throwing blunts and chewing gum. But what he did was essentially change the culture. So quite often, I mean, joke about Malaysians as Singaporeans come to Malaysia over the weekend so they can taste what it's like to break the law, which they can't do at home. So you need to have and then there's upbringing. So the last point I want to make is, in societies where it's become commonplace to see people break the law, you can understand how it becomes the norm. Jaywalking is the norm. Who cares? There is a sign, a traffic sign that says no U-turn, but everyone does. So you say that's the only way to get around things, so you do it, so it becomes the norm. So imagine if you're an 8-year-old kid sitting with your parents who double park, who cross the red line, who do a U-turn, and don't think anything about, not paying their bills, etc. on time. That becomes the norm for kids. And if school teachers behave the same way and don't set the highest bar, that becomes the society. So you need to have them. And I say that internationally too, now we have the norms. And of course, Donald Trump's probably the heavyweight champion of the world, who has normalized the idea that you can lie, which is one of the biggest ethical failures. I mean, none of us are perfect, and some of us may occasionally tell the white lie, right? But to persistently lie is to normalize the worst sort of behavior. And he's got a huge following. So imagine in the United States with the President of America as a large following who don't care that he lies on the world stage. And he uses it as his trademark. So those are the kinds of things that I think we just take for granted now. Oh, the president now said just lies. That's how it is.
So, yeah, what about those people that know that he's lying and care or disagree with him? Why have people become so apathetic?
Well, I think to be fair, there are a lot of people, and though driven by political motives in the Democratic camp, who want to take him down, right? But I would not confuse that with whether they have higher moral standards. But they certainly want to take him down, and that they're using the fact that he blatantly lies as an excuse of his moral failing, right? I'm not suggesting that they would lie to the same degree, but they don't. But the point is that there's a lot of Americans who are opposed, but Donald Trump is likely to get re-elected because there's a lot of Americans who don't care about the lies, which tells you a lot about the society as well. So these sort of feelings, and coming back to Malaysia, I spoke at an anti-corruption conference 3 years ago. I never mentioned the 1MDB scandal. I was a keynote speaker. Everyone expected me to slam the then Prime Minister, etc. But what I said was, all the corruption scandals in the country are essentially rooted in a collective culpability because standards are low. And then I said that collective culpability of failure essentially resides amongst those who are the beneficiaries of education, business success, etc. Because all you need to do is go to the middle class regions of Kuala Lumpur and see how the laws are broken every minute of the day. Double parking, all extensions, people doing all kinds of silly things. These are not poor people from the villages. These are the most educated people. So when the elites break the law, then don't expect those who run the political parties in this country to not think they have a God-given right to also cheat and plunder.
So then, what would you say are some of the solutions to, I don't know if it's examples specific to Malaysia or just...
Well, the solutions is in that, firstly, the most obvious one is if you're an upright citizen of the city, of the country, and you see something, call it out. Too many people are silent. Too many people are lazy. If your neighbor's breaking the law, call them out. I mean, I'm not suggesting you throw a slipper at them, but, call them out, have a conversation. If members of a family, and we all know, are having ethical failures, and ethical failures is not just about money, it's being racist. I mean, being racist is an ethical failure. Discriminating people for whatever reason is an ethical failure. Being intolerant, harassment, not just sexual, but racial harassment, religious harassment. These are all, or even power harassment, which is a thing in Japanese corporate culture, harassment because of authority. You need to call it out in the workplace. So that's the first one. The second, I think, starts at the home. And I think this is a wider societal issue, but it's education, but it's upbringing. And I think the third part is, of course, in countries where, I compared Singapore and Hong Kong, is essentially having extremely tough rules on essentially breaches of this kind. I mean, no society will be perfect. No society will be able to do all of this. But you can reach a certain bar whereby society in general obeys the rules. No Japanese person will cross the red light at 1 minute to midnight on a winter cold day in Japan, even when there are no cars around. Because the culture in the society that has been instilled is if you break that glass, then you will break a lot of other glasses and the waiter won't come in. So they obey. And that's the cultural difference. And so you start by basic fundamentals. Okay. And if you don't have those fundamentals, then you have a wider erosion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Samuel. Then I guess finally, just to wrap up, do you have maybe 3 takeaways that you could share with the audience, or you could leave them with?
Well, the 3 takeaways I would say, which I mentioned, is essentially, firstly, watch your friends and family, support them because they can make mistakes. That's my friend. Made a mistake. He's not a bad person, but made a mistake, and he paid for it, right? Now the question is, will he transgress again? So we have to watch. We have to coach those people closest to us, set very high standards. If you're in charge of a company or a community, set the highest standards and demand that of others, and do not demand things of others which might lead to them needing to break certain laws to meet your requirements. That's typically in business. And thirdly, I think we should demand this in our schools all the time. And where you see lack of enforcement, call it and demand action. Coming back to Kuala Lumpur, this is a fantastic city, we all love it. But all of us are party to law breaking in this country, because when we go and eat, have our dinners and snacks in all those lovely coffee shops, every time some of the shopkeepers put the tables out on the walkways, etc., that's illegal. Don't partake in it. Report it. Call it out. But what do most of us do? Turn a blind eye. And that's essentially what corrodes the society. This will not happen in Japan. So be Japanese.
It's a lesson for today.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks so much, Chandran. And thank you everyone for joining us. We didn't get any live questions today, but if you have any questions or comments as follow-up, please do post on our Facebook page or send us an email. We'll share our general email shortly after this. And thank you again, and we hope to catch you next time on Facebook Live.
Thank you.
Bye.
So we had like 5 to 6 people who watched it, but because some of them are not my friends, so I can't see who's popped up.
Oh.
So only if they're my friends, the names will pop up.
So how do you know who the others are?
I don't
You
know who
don't
they
know.
are. I don't know.
What if they're your friends? What if they're Global Institute for Tomorrow's friends?
But they're not my friends, because you know you have an admin to manage a page. So the person who there's always like real people managing pages. So I'm a real person managing pages. So people who are my friends I can see on the live, but if they're not my friends, I won't be able
So
to
how do we
see.
So how do you
Who
do
are
it
they?
next time?
So the next time,
If you want
I wouldn't be able to tell, but I would be able to.
Jonah watched it.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. So Jonah's one of them then. So because he's not my friend,
Yeah.
so I can't see him.
Cool.
But I'll have to check with what are the names of.
Is it
people.
possible to check?
Yes.
Okay.
So
But
now
no one
Facebook-
asks questions, which is okay.
No, not yet. Because I also think that people tuned in a bit later to get into the whole crux of the thing, so people don't turn up on time, right?
Yeah.
So
Maybe next time we can do like a 5-minute where we just chat
Chat
about
for a bit.
random stuff.
yeah, and then more people join in, and then so for example, like when you said when you see names popping up, right? So it's good to acknowledge, like, hey,
Yeah.
Chris and Anas, thanks for joining us. Just wanted to acknowledge you. Okay, trying to continue.
Yeah.
Right? So something more live when people's presence are being acknowledged, then they tend to stay as
Okay.
opposed to just come in and then okay lah.
But
I'm
it's
leaving.
difficult because he's like in the kind of midway through his thought.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
want
of
to
course.
like be like,
Yeah,
"Bleh,"
yeah.
and
You
then-
can.
Of course.
You want
Yeah.
me to?
No, or once he finishes,
Oh, yeah.
you say, okay,
So I tried to.
yes,
That's what I did.
yeah.
Because I saw
So there's multiple things that you need to do
Yeah.
at the same time. Yeah. But it's
I was like,
interesting.
hold that thought.
Yeah, so it's basically something that's like more like human interface, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
people can see that you're real,
Yeah.
that this is not like something that's done professionally, and then they feel more comfortable to ask questions as well.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Because you know how a lot of podcasts,
Yeah.
even in the beginning, they're just kind of talking, like shooting the breeze.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We would shoot the breeze on something that's like actually purposeful.
Was it okay, Piang?
Yeah, so now I can see
Hey.
who watched.
Who's
Yeah.
that?
So these are the names of people who watched. K. Do you know
Oh,
who
yeah,
this is?
okay. Yeah, from Myanmar.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
She
so,
was one of our alumni.
Yeah, so only if she's my friend, I can see.
that's
I can
my
see,
that's
yeah.
my
Who's Jonah
Boyfriend.
now? I
That's
know.
her boyfriend.
Oh,
Or her partner.
partner.
Yeah. So
her
this is good.
Boyfriend is not cool anymore.
No,
Yeah,
no,
people
no,
say
already.
partner, you know now.
No, fiance, right?
Oh,
Coming
yeah.
up to the next level.
Did you see the studs?
Huh?
No, I didn't bring.
Oh, you ever seen it?
No,
No.
I didn't bring the KLA
Why?
because
Lost.
I didn't want to lose it.
Yeah. So funny. So like this,
Hey,
now
what's
already
this? What's
70,
this
yeah.
mean?
So this is basically the video reached 76 people, right?
So
But
more and
when-
more people it will reach eventually.
Yes. So
Okay.
this is because now the recording is
Oh,
live. So
yeah.
then people will just come in and watch. Whenever they come, they can, and then we can reshare this and say, "Hey, you
Okay.
missed the
So were
live
you happy
session.
with that?
We can replay."
How's that?
Yes, it was. No, I think the time is fine. Usually when people do live, they do 1 hour,
Oh.
1 hour live, because just to get people to tune in will take time. And usually whenever people go live, there's actually like a whole series of nudging people to remind people that there's a Facebook Live happening.
Yeah, well,
So-
you need a squad, right?
Yes, you do need to squad. But so this is an example of when you're doing your e-learning platform and we talk about the live coaching sessions. This is how we prompt people.
Yeah,
Like 3 days, 2 days, 1 day, 45 minutes. We're live, guys. Come and join
You
us.
nudge.
Yeah,
nudge,
yeah, yeah.
basically.
Through emails.
That'll be a team doing that. That's
Yeah.
not us. Don't
Yeah.
worry about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
What
So
else
this is
did you
good.
think
Cool.
about it?
This is cool. So this is good. So, oh, thank God.